Hi, everyone. This is Tanya Goldman at the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP. We're excited to continue our partnership with the Center for Innovation and Worker Organization at Rutgers and bring you our first labor standards enforcement webinar of 2019. A few quick logistics before we get started. Please feel free to submit questions throughout your presentation and during the Q&A at the end, and you can do this using the chat box feature, which should be on the right side of your screen. And we'll share those questions. We'll read them out loud for you. We want to welcome all the state and local government agencies and advocacy organizations. You can see them all listed on the slide in front of you who are on the call today. It's really great to connect with such a diverse community. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build community enforcement capacity, highlighting the amazing work that's currently happening in Massachusetts and Seattle. This webinar really complements our webinars and briefs that we've been doing on strategic enforcement. We often talk with you all in this community about partnerships and about strategic enforcement. How can agencies maximize their resources and enforcement efforts by focusing on where the problems are largest, but where workers are least likely to exercise their legal rights? But we also have to recognize that there are trade-offs that come with strategic enforcement, including not being able to accept every incoming complaint from workers. We hope the examples today will help us think further about how we can increase capacity for workers needing assistance with their workplace rights. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Jen Round, who is going to be representing CWO.
Hi, everybody. So we will hear first today from Kate Watkins and Pablo Carrasco in Massachusetts. Kate is an Assistant Attorney General with the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office, Fair Labor Division, and Pablo is a staff attorney at Metro West Legal Services. Then we will head over to the Pacific Northwest to hear from Katie Jo Keppinger, who is the Enforcement Manager at the Seattle Office of Labor Standards, and Elizabeth Board, who is the Legal Director at the Fair Work Center in Seattle and a Distinguished Practitioner in Residence at the Seattle University School of Law. We've got 4 really exciting speakers today, and we're so glad that you're all with us to share in this conversation. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kate and Pablo.
Hey guys, Kate?
Sorry, I had everyone on mute. We'll start with a couple maybe introductions and background about the clinic in Massachusetts. So I'm Kate Watkins. I'm an attorney in the Fair Labor Division of the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. And before that, I did outreach for the division, working closely with our community partners, including Pablo.
Yeah, and I'm Pablo Carrasco. I'm an attorney at Metro West Legal Services. We're a legal aid office about 15 miles west of Boston, and I do mostly wage and hour litigation and unemployment benefits.
And in terms of background for the clinic, in Massachusetts, our wage and hour laws have both private and public enforcement mechanisms. The Attorney General's Office, through the Fair Labor Division, is the enforcement agency. And we receive roughly 6,000 complaints a year, so way more than we can investigate. And so most complaints that we receive, complainants receive a letter from our office in response to a complaint, authorizing them to pursue their wage claim privately. The great thing about wage claims in Massachusetts, or the private right of action in Massachusetts, is that workers who go to court and win are entitled to treble damages. They're also entitled to costs and attorney's fees. So all that is great and sets the groundwork for robust private enforcement of wage laws. But of course, it can be daunting. And the question is, well, how does someone actually go about pursuing their claims privately? When we issue a private right of action letter to workers in response to their complaint, we include a list of resources. But we think that people could really benefit from having more direct assistance accessing those resources, and that's really the basis for this clinic, connecting workers with legal advocates and others who can help them pursue their wage claims, or at least give them advice and brief service to help them do that. So some workers might come to a clinic seeking full representation, but they can also benefit from brief services like getting advice about the strength of their claim or how to pursue it, or concrete assistance with things like writing a demand letter or actually filing a complaint. And that kind of brief service, I think, is especially helpful in the context of the complaints that we receive, because most of them are for less than $7,000, so they would be, under the threshold for small claims. And so everyone who comes to the clinic has the opportunity to meet with an attorney or an advocate, like a supervised law student, to talk about their case. And they may get assistance after the clinic too. And that might also include full representation. It's part of our overall mission to reduce wage theft in Massachusetts by encouraging private enforcement. Our sense is that the wage theft is a huge problem, and there's a lot of room to improve the rate at which complaints that we don't take for investigation are pursued privately. Some of our partners have been involved in setting up a special wage theft session at Boston Municipal Court in order to organize wage claims on a particular day and arrange for advocates to be there to assist plaintiffs. And one of the responses that they got from the courts is, well, we don't see a lot of wage theft cases. Is this really an issue? And that tells us that there's a lot of room to help people pursue these claims more successfully, or at least pursue them privately. It also helps us because it gives us leverage. If we actually are investigating a case, then the specter of private enforcement and of treble damages, the more realistic and probable that is, the more likely that employers are to want to settle with us. So that's sort of our perspective on the clinic and what it provides. But I'll turn it over to Pablo to talk about his interactions with people at the clinic and why he's involved with it.
Sure. Thank you, Kate. So yeah, like Kate mentioned, Massachusetts law is, for lack of a better term, robust when it comes to wage enforcement. The treble damages are mandatory for a prevailing party. There's attorney's fees, there's costs. So there's a really strong incentive for attorneys to take on these cases. Especially in cases where the plaintiff can't pay by the hour. These are good, good cases for attorneys to take. I like to do these cases because I like to help the little guy. My work is pretty much 100% of my clients are undocumented immigrant workers. These are people who are not just poverty-stricken in the typical sense, but they're also, poverty is different, not having paperwork, not having status, not having resources, and I like to be that bridge for them to provide resources. So what I generally do is when I meet people at the clinic, we just talk. I like to hear the story, see what's going on, and some of the time these cases, it's not a wage case. A lot of them could be, wrongful termination. I have to explain at-will employment to people. And sometimes people are a little disappointed that they don't have a case. But I've heard time and time again, people just tell me, hey, I'm really happy I got to talk to somebody. And, I found out I don't have a legal issue, but I can sleep tonight. I can finally get over this. And that makes me pretty happy. And there are other times where I get workers, who are like my client base, undocumented workers. They come in, you look at them, you can tell they just came from a work site. And they're desperate for advice, for help. And, some of these guys, when I say guys, I'm sorry, I mean, a lot of these workers do construction. And they're desperate for help, desperate for their wages. And we talk about the process. And we litigate these matters when we have to. We do. And, I've been very happy to, I've met maybe 10 workers through the clinic who I've been able to, litigate and collect their wages completely. And sometimes even a little more than they're owed. And I've just been very happy to be a partner there. And it's great practice also. Sometimes you talk to 15 people in a row, and it's great practice. I love it. I just like hearing people's stories.
And obviously there would be no clinic without our partners, because we can't do any of the things that workers get at the clinic, like getting legal advice, help evaluating their claims, and of course help with things like filling out court complaints. And so the foundation for the clinic is in our longstanding collaboration with partners in the community, legal services providers like Pablo, community-based worker centers, and particularly immigrant worker centers, other advocates, and also other enforcement agencies. So all of these partners, a very large group of partners, helped us work together to develop and refine the idea for the clinic, come up with ideas about places where the clinic could be held, considerations to take into account when deciding on locations, bringing other partners on board. And to this day, there's the people who come to the clinic, who provide services directly at the clinic, and then we also have partners who maybe aren't there physically but are referring workers to the clinic, are letting people know about it or helping with outreach. And I think the clinic itself sort of dovetails with this effort by our other partners to create a wage theft clinic at Boston Municipal Court, and also help plaintiffs there on that day, so that we're all working together to attack wage theft from all conceivable angles. And so the collaboration is the cornerstone of this clinic. And then we also see that there's a lot of collaboration among partners at the clinic, among service providers. I don't know, Pablo, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So there's some cases that I get people walk in. I had one gentleman telling me he was owed a commission of $100,000. That's not the kind of guy I can help generally. So I referred him to a private attorney who was present at the clinic, and they had a discussion. I don't know where that went, but it's good just, in the same room, you can have a guy with a $1,000 claim and then someone else $100,000 commission case, So it's good that, anyone can come and find somebody to talk to. There's another important facet of the wage theft clinic, I think, is that, we have our state agency, but we also have the Department of Labor present. There are cases that, aren't covered under Massachusetts law, for example, restaurant worker overtime or hotel worker overtime cases. And those are cases that, I can refer to the DOL. There's one case in particular, actually, that I remember. It was a gentleman who was working for a restaurant, a well-known restaurant in Boston. It's a chain. He wasn't being paid overtime. And he was at the wage theft clinic, even though it's not, let's say, a Massachusetts law issue. Someone from DOL was there. And I just heard at the last wage theft clinic from their outreach at the DOL that they're settling this case for 6 figures. It's a lot of money going back to the community, to workers that, otherwise wouldn't be there. And the reason they got access is because DOL was there, all the partners were in one place, and, people can collaborate and talk. And I think that's a tremendous value for workers, and, it's a team. It's a team effort.
So the partners involved in the clinic are, the Attorney General's office. We handle mostly administrative work in support of the clinic, scheduling the clinics. We do the initial screening at the clinic, provide some of the technology that's needed for the clinic, as well as materials. We also do, through our community engagement division, a substantial amount of outreach in advance of each clinic. So that will be calls and emails to workers within a certain radius of the clinic who've received a private right of action. And one lesson we've learned from our outreach division over the years is that if you want people to show up to your event, then there's no substitute for personal, individual outreach, so phone calls and emails. And I think that's made it, had a tremendous effect on attendance at the clinic. We ask people when they first arrive, how did you hear about the clinic? And most often they respond, oh, I received a phone call or an email from your office. Even though those people necessarily also got a private right of action from us with a flyer about the wage theft clinic, letting them know about it, it's really that personal contact that makes the impression and gets them there. And then our staff do a lot of the interpretation that happens at a clinic too. So if a worker speaks a language other than English, on our staff, we're able to accommodate most of the languages most frequently spoken by complainants. So that's another function that we provide for the clinic. We, of course, have a host agency or organization. So we have monthly clinics in Boston at Suffolk Law School. And then quarterly or so, we also have clinics in other parts of the state hosted by other community organizations. And I think things to consider for location are accessibility. So, of course, is it physically accessible? Is it easily accessible by public transportation, by car? And is there security? So will attendees need to provide identification? What are there workarounds for people who don't have ID or are concerned about presenting ID or concerned about their immigration status? And overall, how intimidating is the setting? Will people feel welcome? Will people be concerned about being turned away or being identified? Of course, we have our legal service organizations as well as private bar attorneys, particularly important for attendees who don't qualify for services from the legal services organizations in the room. And we've come up with some ways to encourage participation by private bar attorneys. For one thing, we've conducted trainings through bar associations for more than 100 lawyers and advocates on the basics of wage and hour laws. And that does two functions. It increases the capacity among the private bar to handle wage and hour cases generally, but I think it also encourages private attorneys to come to our clinics and take cases, whether they're on a pro bono basis or on a fee basis. We also developed relationships with accelerator programs and incubator programs for new solo practitioners to encourage participation that way. And we have, any attorney who participates in the clinic has a memorandum of understanding with us and agrees that they will be limited to certain fee arrangements, which are, of course, the statutory fees if they prevail in court, and contingency fees. But other fee arrangements aren't permitted for cases that are obtained through the clinic. Pablo mentioned earlier that the Wage and Hour Division from the U.S. Department of Labor participates in our clinic. It's just another resource that's there to provide information about federal law and even conduct intake for possible investigations. Our Worker Center partners participate too. They might be at the clinic, especially if they've referred someone to the clinic, a worker to the clinic, and might assist them doing sort of a warm handoff with advocates there. We have Bar Association at the clinic too that can get the process rolling for a referral to another attorney. And then we also compiled like a panel of volunteer interpreters, and when we were getting the clinics underway, not sure what languages we would need and what capacity we would have. I think it's a good thing to think about how you'll handle that situation. We've been able to handle interpretation needs on our staff, and of course we have partners who speak other languages too. But we do have that resource if we need to call upon it. When we reach out to workers, we do ask them if they need an interpreter to try to get advance notice and make arrangements as necessary. And then the clinics have been going on in Boston since October of 2016, and then we've also expanded to other areas of the state. Generally, we have between 15 and 30 workers attend each clinic, and our partners have reported around $325,000 in recoveries in connection with the clinic. So that's either recoveries that they've obtained or that they're aware of because they're continue to be in contact with someone that they met at the clinic. But it doesn't include, people who use the help that they got at the clinic to pursue their wages and just haven't reported it back to us. So that's some of the macro achievements of the clinic. I know Pablo has some case stories. He's represented workers in connection with the clinic and can tell us about those.
Sure. So one of the things that I really like about the clinic is, that I get to meet people with their stories, and it's not just a case; it's a story. There's a lot going on to these people. These things are heavy situations in their lives. I've met quite a few people who have had these good stories, these good results. One of them right now, you can see him on your screen. His name is Mario. He was working for a construction company doing, I think they were taking him down to school. It was 2 weeks of work. He wasn't getting paid. Reached out to his employer, hey, when are you going to pay me? I'll pay you next week. One time we even sent him to an empty field. When he arrived, it was just a field. There was no one there to pay him. Eventually, he asked him for his address, his personal address, so he could mail him the check. And then he responds to my client saying, hey, I know where you live. Cut it out. You're not getting paid. Forget about it. And with this story, he came to the clinic. I met him and I talked to him, and I was moved by his story, and I was, very, very motivated to help him. I think this one we had to litigate, and I think the attorney paid my guy probably a month earlier, before the hearing. So he was happy, didn't have to go to court, and he got his pay. Another case I have is actually one that was referred to me from another worker center, the Lynn Worker Center. It was a lady by the name of Alicia. She had been working at a laundromat. She had gotten paid her first 2 weeks, and then she was fired and wasn't paid for the last 3 weeks of work. This was a difficult case because I couldn't find who the owner of the laundromat was. There were so many DBAs and a lot going on. But eventually I did find the employer, and we filed suit, and she got paid her wages in cash on the day of the hearing. And she was very happy. This is money that would otherwise be gone. These people would not have this money, take care of their families, take care of themselves. I'm just really glad I have this connection at with the AG and the wage staff clinic. So just a natural outgrowth of what I do here in Metro West Legal Services.
I think we're at the point now to turn it over to you, Katie Jo and Liz from Seattle.
Yes, hi. This is Katie Jo Keppinger. I'm at the Seattle Office of Labor Standards, and I'm here with Liz Ford from the Fair Work Center. We have maybe we can advance the slide, just a roadmap of kind of the topics we're going to cover. I'll explain some about Seattle's enforcement structure and our Community Outreach and Education Fund. And then Liz will be talking more about the legal clinic. And
they're starting with what we mean by legal clinic, because I think we use that word to mean a lot of different things. So I just want to start by talking about how we use that term in Seattle, and then because I think some of you are likely thinking about how to incorporate community-based legal services into if you're lucky enough to have a sort of forward-thinking enforcement agency that includes outreach and education funding. What are the arguments for including legal services in that? And then we're both going to talk about our partnership and our hopes and dreams.
Okay, so the next slide lays out some information about our enforcement structure, and just a little background about our office. We were born out of the Seattle Office of Civil Rights Office, which began enforcing Seattle's Paid Sick and Safe Time Ordinance in 2012. And then the Office of Labor Standards grew into a new division of the Office of Civil Rights in 2015 and added minimum wage, wage theft, and fair chance employment enforcement to the PSST enforcement. And in 2017, we became an independent office, and we added secure scheduling ordinance and the Hotel Employees Health and Safety Initiative to our list of labor standards that we enforce. Now, this year, we are enforcing paid sick and safe time, minimum wage, wage theft, fair chance employment, secure scheduling ordinance, domestic workers ordinance. We'll start enforcing that in July, and the commuter benefits ordinance, which we may not be actually actively enforcing that until a bit later. And the Hotel Employees Health and Safety Initiative is currently under litigation, so we are accepting complaints about under that ordinance, but we are not investigating those complaints at this time. So we have a set of enforcement priorities, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. And basically, because we receive a lot of requests for help from workers, we don't have the resources to investigate every complaint. So we have set some guidelines for screening calls and emails and other intakes, so that we are focusing on the most vulnerable workers here in Seattle and trying to reach them and provide them with our resources. So this year, we are looking at folks who earn less than or at 350% of the federal poverty guidelines, and that breaks down to $43,715 per year, an hourly wage of $21.02. We changed that recently with the new year when we got the new federal poverty guidelines. Last year we used the guidelines for 2018. We look at folks who, because of the alleged labor standards violation, have lost at least 1 week's worth of wages. So folks who are looking at less than that, we will refer them out, which I'll talk about later. We're also looking at folks who are working in high violation industries, which basically it's service industries, hotels, restaurants, construction as well, and manufacturing. It covers basically quite a lot of categories of work. And we also are just attempting to reach those folks who need us the most, so people who are facing multiple barriers to accessing the protections of our ordinances. We do company-wide investigations, so we do receive complaints from individual workers and initiate investigations based on those complaints, and we convert those to company-wide investigations. We also conduct directed investigations in which we don't have a main complaining party. And we do this to try to have a greater impact and to amplify our effect within an industry or across industries, and just outside of just the individual employer that we're investigating. We involve our community partners, and where we can, we try to align with and be aware of national efforts for strategic enforcement. Let's see, the next slide has a lovely outdated photo of our enforcement team. Currently, we have 9 investigators and 1 paralegal, 1 data specialist, an enforcement strategist, and an enforcement manager, and we're expecting to hire 2 additional investigators this year. The investigators share worker intake on a weekly rotation. Last year, we received almost 1,000 worker inquiries by phone, email, web, or walk-in. Our policy and business outreach side handle inquiries from employers. They also received about 1,000 inquiries last year. And then because we have a lot of folks who are coming to us for assistance, we do have a wait list for our investigations. We have succeeded in winnowing it down a bit recently, but the complaints keep coming in and we keep hearing of more violations. And so we still have a wait list, and that's generally where we assign our investigations from. And we assign those based on investigator capacity, our enforcement priorities, the urgency of the investigation and the particular situation, support availability of support from community partners, and the potential ripple effect that the investigation might have. We also, starting in 2018, began publicizing more openly wins for workers in which we are naming employers and naming the number of affected employees and the types of violations and stating the complete financial remedies. So we've been doing that through social media and in press releases. Okay, next slide, please. And just a bit about what we mean by strategic enforcement. This is something our office has been talking about and working towards for the last couple of years. And by strategic enforcement, we're intending to increase labor standards compliance among employers here in Seattle, particularly in industries or sectors where there's a high rate of violations, but perhaps a low rate of complaints. And it's a work in progress. We have had some strategic enforcement efforts in the last year. One of them involved some painting companies, and we brought in the painters contracting company to do a training for them, although that has yet to be scheduled. And we work closely with community organizations and other City of Seattle departments to bring about compliance with our labor standards ordinances. We also collaborate with other agencies and institutions and organizations in other jurisdictions. And we attempt to use creatively our social media presence and our press releases to create positive ripple effects for our workers here in Seattle. A little bit about our Community Outreach and Education Fund. That's the next slide. So we have, we're very fortunate to have funding that we can provide to 7 organizations and community partnerships here in Seattle through our Community Outreach and Education Fund. We have approximately $3.2 million that go to 2-year contracts for 7 organizations and community partnerships. So those groups conduct door-to-door outreach, and they host community-based education events. They have worker trainings and provide intake, counseling, complaint resolution, representation, legal advice, and all sorts of support for workers who may be exercising their private right of action. So each partner has a different or unique area of focus, a community that they focus on, and so each partner is emphasizing reaching out to those workers in those communities. The Business Outreach and Education Fund, we're not so actively working with them in terms of enforcement, although we may be this year. They receive $1.4 million for 2-year contracts, and there are 5 organizations or community partnerships receiving funding through the Business Outreach and Education Fund. So the next slide just lists our partners, and you'll see there are some that are sort of standalone organizations, and then there are 2 big collaboratives, the Latino Community Collaborative, of which Casa Latina is the lead, and the Fair Work Collaborative, of which the Fair Work Center is the lead. And these are unique, particularly I'm looking at the Washington Wage Claim Project, which is part of the Latino Community Collaborative, and the Fair Work Center, part of the Fair Work Collaborative. Both of these organizations have legal clinics and attorneys who provide direct representation to workers. And I believe we're unique in that we provide funding to organizations that provide these services. And I guess with that, perhaps Liz can take it from there.
Great. So again, I'm Liz Ford. I'm the legal director for the Fair Work Center Legal Clinic. And so the Fair Work Center Legal Clinic is a part of the Fair Work Center, which itself is a C3 organization that a portion of which engages in community education and outreach, and then we have the clinic within the Fair Work Center. So the first thing I wanted to do was answer the question, what do we mean when we say clinic? And so really what we're talking about is a law office that provides free legal services to low-wage workers. And in our case, that law office is embedded in this community organization. And the pyramid there is intended to describe how we do our work. And I should stop for a second and apologize. I don't usually sound this much like Lauren Bacall. I am getting over a cold. So send a text or a note if you can't hear me adequately. So the pyramid here is intended to describe not so much priority, but quantity, and then the sort of strategic decisions that we have to make going up the pyramid. So at the bottom, you'll see the largest component of work that we do are intakes, and these really are legal consultations, and we do them through monthly community clinics, and those involve law students, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, and volunteer lawyers providing really an hour of legal advice to low-wage workers in the site that might be the law school, or might be the Fair Work Center office, or could be at one of our community partners' locations. We also operate an intake line that is a phone number you can call anytime, and either talk directly with a lawyer or make an appointment to talk to a lawyer. And lastly, we have drop-in hours at our office where workers can come in and get a consultation right then, or make an appointment to have a consultation. So we probably did around 500 intakes last year, and about the same number the year before. And so of those intakes, and I'll show you in a second kind of how it breaks down in terms of what how many are information only and how much involves some of the things further up the pyramid. One thing that we do in many cases is help the worker take that next step. First, provide the information, and then if it is a question of completing a form, help with letter to an employer, those are kinds of things that we would put in the self-help category. The worker is doing the work themselves, but we are providing some support. We also sometimes do employer education letters, or I like to call them make good choices letters, where we just alert the employer to an issue that's happening in their workplace and the legal consequences of that issue, and sort of admonish them to make good choices. And then going up the pyramid, we have a small claims program that really is designed off Boston's wonderful program, and in King County, in Seattle, and in Washington as a whole, unfortunately, individuals can't be represented in small claims court, and so we provide support up to the point of appearing on the workers' behalf. So we'll help them with the forms, we'll go to the hearings with the workers, we'll participate in any mediation that happens there, and then the worker will present the case, him or herself. And then in a small number of cases, we take the cases on for full representation, meaning we're filing a lawsuit on the worker's behalf. We sometimes represent workers in administrative actions where we want to push a particular agency on an issue that we think is important. And then finally, we do impact advocacy. That could look like amicus briefs, or regulatory work, or class action lawsuits, of which we've had a couple. Okay, so the next slide, please. Here's what the clinic looks like for us. So this is an opportunity for me to tell you kind of how this came to be, in case that's useful in your thinking about, if you're thinking about building a partnership. So at the point that the Office of Labor Standards was becoming its own agency and sort of really be thinking about community partnerships and thinking about resourcing community partnerships, the Fair Work Center was also sort of coming into being to try to bring together the community groups that could be most useful in that process. And at the same time, I was teaching at Seattle University, and was noticing that of these two wonderful law schools that we have in Seattle, there were no workers' rights clinics. There's lots of student interest, but there wasn't a clinic. And so I was running around town with a PowerPoint trying to convince anyone who would listen that we should establish a clinic for low-wage workers and partner with our two law schools. And happily, the people who were thinking about the Fair Work Center, in sort of a Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland moment, said, "Well, let's include a clinic." And so we did, and we weren't quite sure what we meant, but we knew that we had. So it was just me plus this. The picture you see on the right is the first cohort of law students enrolled in the clinical course, and so we knew we had those pieces. And so the question was, how, where will our cases come from, and will people, if we throw this party, will people come? And it turns out they did, in pretty big numbers. And so our intake function was quickly, not overwhelmed but full, and we knew we needed that we had found something in which there was a big need, and we could make a significant difference. And so since that time, the clinic has grown to 4 attorneys. Those are the 4 people you see in the pictures. Going clockwise, I'm the one looking unnaturally blonde, and then below me is Danielle Kim, Sean Donani, and Katie Cameron. So really, it's kind of been an amazing period of growth. Okay, so next slide. So I wanted to, in the nature of who's going to come to our party, I wanted to give you a little visual right now. This is from the 4th quarter of 2018, where our cases come from. And so starting at the bottom, you see that about a quarter of our cases come from the Fair Work Center collaborative members. Those are the community organizations that Fair Work Center is is the host for. And then next to that is this is Working Washington, which is our partner C4 organization. So that are doing organizing around bigger policy issues. But oftentimes, for example, Working Washington has a canvas, and so oftentimes workers who need a canvasser find their way from there back to the clinic. We are getting a lot of referrals from just nonprofits all over the city and the state now. The King County Bar Association is a partner of ours. They have a community neighborhood legal clinic program, of which we are their only employment neighborhood legal clinics. We get a lot of referrals from them. And increasingly, we're getting referrals from legal services, from private lawyers, yes, private lawyers, and then enforcement agencies. So Katie Jo and I will talk a little bit about the referrals going from OLS to the Fair Work Center Legal Clinic, but also our statewide agency is sometimes now sending us cases that they, for one reason or another, we're better positioned to enforce. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so quickly, I want to just give you, since one of the great benefits of being funded by a city or state is that you have to report statistics, and so that means that we kind of have them at the ready, which is really useful to see what's happening. So the first one is the industries. This is 4th quarter 2018, and you can see the top 3, and they always are the top 3, quarter to quarter, for us at least. Manufacturing, transportation, and the last word is warehouse. And the second is social assistance, education, and childcare. So we see the sort of nonprofit sector is always in the top 3 for us. And it does include, home care and childcare. And then third is food service. And again, those flip around. Sometimes food service is first, but those 3 are always in the top 3. So next one. And then here are the top legal issues that we see. I don't know if you can see those very clearly, but wage theft and discrimination are always one and two, and retaliation is always right next door. And then the last little infographic here is kind of what happens when a worker comes to the clinic. What happens then? So in about 30% of the cases, we are handling them. Now, remember, this is a snapshot, so this is in one moment in time what is happening with cases. But handling may mean anything from self-help assistance to full-on representation to small claims. And then information only is about a quarter of the cases. People are call for the information. If they get what they need and they're ready to go, then having a good sense of what their options are. In about 17% of the cases, we refer to private attorneys. One of the things that we have found is that in low wage situations, it is very difficult for workers to find private attorneys and for private attorneys to take a single violation low wage worker case. And it is, I think, because for a for-profit firm, it is very difficult to break even on those cases. And so we have a large number of low-wage workers that aren't going to find private attorneys. And so we try not to refer that set of workers to private attorneys, but rather the ones where we're pretty sure that they are going to be able to find an attorney to take their case on contingency. About 10% of the cases we refer for agency action, so we try to be judicious about that, knowing that OLS has usually a significant wait list, and there are certain cases that our statewide agency is good at, and certain cases that we want to make sure to find other options for. And then in a small number of cases, we'd have no response. We refer to nonprofits. There may be advocacy that can that is more appropriately done by another nonprofit. And sometimes right off the bat, we get a settlement with the employer. Okay, so next slide. Oh, we recovered more than $1 million last year. Yay. Okay, so here are the arguments I think of when I think about how to advocate for including legal services and community outreach funding. The first is strategic enforcement. So there's a picture of Janice Fine. And we were really lucky in the course of developing both the Office of Labor Standards and the sort of community partners to have Janice's guidance. And so it is sort of firmly embedded in my mind that what we're trying to do has to do with the high violation, low complaint agencies or communities. We're trying to reach those communities. And so legal services as part of an outreach and education function helps us to do that, because once you have educated a worker about their rights, it is incredibly helpful to be able to say to them, and you can have a confidential individual consultation about this, and there's and we can provide you with actual options about how to enforce those rights now. And then second argument has to do with access to justice. And so that's the second, there it is. This is the slide that I show all the time when I talk about that in Washington State. So the Washington State Supreme Court yearly does a, I mess up the name every time. It's their access to justice survey. They survey low-income folks in Washington and ask them these two questions, among many others. And first is, what is the most prevalent problem that you are experiencing? And so in answering that, the number 3 most prevalent problem is an employment problem. So people are low-income folks are identifying employment as the 3rd most prevalent problem that they're having. And then when asked, what is the problem you will most often seek legal help for, it doesn't appear on the list. And I think there are 2 possible explanations for that. The first is that that people don't know that there's a legal dimension to the employment problem that they are having, and so don't seek legal help for it. And so the second possibility is that they know there's a legal component to that problem, but they also know they're not going to find a lawyer. And so either way, it makes sense to combine outreach and education with legal services, free legal services, so to try to address both of those barriers to justice. And the third reason has to do with increasing agency capacity. So you just heard from Katie Jo that they get way more complaints than they could investigate. And so how do we increase that capacity? And how do we do it in a smart, strategic way? So thinking about what government can do uniquely well and what a sort of private legal services office can do uniquely well. And so small claims is a great answer to that question. And there are a bunch of others, right? So demand letters, individual action, make good choices letters, things that we can do that government can't do as easily. So there are three arguments. Next slide. Okay, so Katie Jo, I'm going to tell this story.
Yeah, that's fine.
Chime in whenever you want. So we have been working together closely and really having a blast doing it. And we wanted to tell the origin story, which does predate Katie Jo, but how it came to be that we have really been making an effort to be strategic and collaborative. And so it happened at the very, very beginning of the clinic. Like, we were open for maybe 5 minutes, and we got a whole bunch of workers from Beecher's Cheese, which is sort of this iconic Seattle company that were having, among others, problems with paid sick and safe time. And so we, first thing we did was to, get their information and make a request for a director's charge. So we did that, sent that into OLS, letterhead, and then waited. And, sort of thought about doing a motion to intervene, but kind of thought, well, if they've got it now, that's going to happen. And so, in the meantime, OLS was also in their very, very beginning stages and didn't have access to some of the information that our workers had, and we weren't talking to one another. So neither of us knew what was happening with the other one. And for us, the agency work was a little bit of a black box. Like, we made some assumptions about what would be happening there, but we weren't checking those assumptions, and we weren't sort of talking to each other. And so when we both realized that this case was sort of not progressing, we actually sat down and started talking about, okay, how can we do this differently? What do we need to do to be in real partnership with each other? And we'll talk about what those things are. But it turns out the most important of those things is just to get together, to get to know each other, to understand the work that we're each doing, and so that we can identify what each of us does uniquely well, and then figure out how we find the places where we can be most effective together. And I will say one thing else about the origin story, and that is, we once we started down this road, we actually used the law school clinic as a place to convene. And so I just designated one of our seminar days to just have, and OLS was incredibly generous. All of the investigators came, and all of the law students were there. And we just put up on a big whiteboard, okay, what does government do uniquely well? What does, in our case, Fair Work Center do uniquely well? And how can we attach those things together? And it was, if nothing else, really fun, and we got to know each other. Okay, next one. So, Katie Jo, how should we do this one?
Oh, well, I guess we can kind of alternate, I suppose.
Okay. So I'll take the first one. How about?
Okay.
So, like I said, the sort of foundational thing we did was that we just started meeting every single month. And whether or not we thought we had anything burning, we would just get together and share information. And it started out that we were, Beecher's Cheese was always sort of number one on our agenda, but and I should tell you, Beecher's Cheese ended with a settlement negotiation and good things for the workers, including a going forward wage increase. And Beecher's realized they needed an actual HR function, which I think is great news for everybody. So they did the right thing. All right, so that's monthly check-in.
Yes. Well, and information sharing is sort of covers a lot of areas, but if we are noticing a particular trend in intakes, or if Fair Work Center Legal Clinic is observing a particular trend, say workers from a particular employer or in a particular industry or having a specific type of complaint that is cropping up more often, we share that information just to have a better sense of what is going on out in the community.
Yeah, and I think over the years, as we've built more trust, we've been increasingly sort of willing and able to share really kind of important information about who we're seeing and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Communication partnerships, meaning like, so early on we did a joint op-ed about sort of took the opportunity of a particularly egregious Department of Labor secretary appointee and used that as an opportunity to talk about enforcement generally and strategic enforcement in particular in an op-ed.
And I foresee that with future press releases and publications coming from our communications department, we'll likely be partnering with Fair Work Center and other community partners to provide more information or insights into particular cases that we've had or violation types. I think we've had some of the members of the Fair Work Collaborative have been quoted in our press releases recently. And then we have our waitlist referral, which is kind of where I came in and became acquainted with Liz. So as I mentioned earlier, we had quite a sizable wait list of investigations that had gone through the intake process and were essentially just waiting for us to initiate an investigation. And because of capacity and staffing issues, we just hadn't had the ability to move through that wait list with great speed. So I think it was in 2018 that our office had a conversation. I think our director had a conversation with Liz just about the fact that we had this wait list, and maybe there was some sort of way to approach it collaboratively. And I think, Liz, you had conversations with our director, and then you and I met, and we've determined that we would try out a pilot where our office would look through the waitlisted investigations and with input from the Fair Work Center, determine which ones might be best suited for a referral to the Fair Work Center Legal Clinic. And then our office reached out to the complainants to ask if they would be interested in that and to explain the relationship and what potential outcomes could be. And most folks were interested because it meant the possibility of a quicker resolution than they would be facing through our office. So I have not been keeping track exactly of the number of investigations that have waitlisted investigations that have been referred to Fair Work Center, but it's quite a few, and with varying degrees of involvement ultimately from the complainants, and some of them have turned out differently than others. But I think it's been a good practice and it also keeps us in touch, and we're both involved in basically have our ears to the ground through these monthly meetings, but also with these referrals as well. We could talk about issues that are cropping up out in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think the small claims option is also sort of related to the wait list, and that part of the reason that we developed that was to try to take some of the cases from the wait list, if those cases were under $5,000, and offer the complainant the option of going through small claims court supported by us. And the way we do that is we sort of have a choose your own adventure representation agreement. You know, the worker can choose to have as much or as little assistance as they want. And then on the next,
sorry.
by this one, I think what I meant by this was that where we have particular cases in common, you know, one worker from Musashi has called OLS, and another worker has gone through the intake with us. We know that and work together and try to resolve them in a way that's consistent and maybe even helpful to each other.
Yes, and it's sometimes these situations involve folks who have complaints pending with other agencies as well, perhaps with the Seattle Office for Civil Rights or with the Department of State Labor and Industries. So we do try to coordinate as much as we can so that the workers are not don't have to deal with so many repeated interactions with government and various government agencies.
All right, I think we have to go fast. Clearly, we like to chat. So, all right, so I think we should just go like zoom through this one probably.
Sure.
So our hopes and dreams are to work together on the strategic enforcement piece that Kim Jo was describing earlier, and figure out again what where the community-based nonprofit can plug in. Likewise on industry coordination, just figuring out, should we be complementing each other or in terms of targeting particular industries or targeting the same industries. Settlement conference is an idea that I keep pushing, which is that government can uniquely convene people to a settlement conference, but once they get there, if the power differential that existed before that continues, unless you have some, a lawyer can make a difference there. So could we insert a lawyer into a settlement conference and sort of level that playing field? And moving this around the region and the nation, which is what we're doing here, I think, hopefully.
Yeah, great. This is Tanya again from class. Thank you guys so much. That was incredible. It was such valuable information from Pablo, Katie Jo, Liz, and Kate. We really, really appreciate it. We have gotten a few questions. I know we're running over time. I'm just going to throw out two of the questions for the panelists to answer if they're able to, and then we'll connect any questions that don't get answered. We'll connect you with the panelists and get that information to you afterwards. So one of the questions we got from Josh in San Francisco was, do you have any tracking information comparing the outcomes of your directed investigations versus complaint-driven investigations? And relatedly, how many strategic investigations do you conduct per year on average? And I think this was directed to Seattle specifically. And we also got a question from, I'll just add the last one and let you guys take them, from Greg Assay for both Massachusetts and Seattle, asking, what is the level of funding provided by respective government agencies and what are the performance measures in the contract? So maybe if you can all just take 1 minute or two to answer those to the extent you're able, and then we'll close out with Jen. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So we do have tracking information. I don't have that information all together in front of me right now, but I'd be happy to provide that after I reviewed our database here. But we do have tracking information comparing the outcomes of our directed investigations. They vary quite a bit in because they come under different ordinances, so the outcomes vary. But I'd be happy to provide more detailed information to you about that later. And then the number of strategic investigations that we conduct per year. That is a good question. We have counts of the directed investigations, and then so directed investigations are not the only type of strategic investigation from our perspective. We will pursue a case, for example, if the main complainant is found not to be eligible for relief, but perhaps many other workers or job applicants are. So in that sort of a situation, it's quasi-directed in that we've decided to move forward anyway, even though the main complainant is out of the picture. So it depends on kind of what you're counting. If we're counting just purely directeds, I believe we had 4 or 5 in 2016, and I believe 10 in 2017. I'm not sure about 2018. I don't have that number in front of me, but I can get that to you. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the last question.
That was great, Katie Jo. Thanks. And then for both Mass and Seattle, if any of you want to answer this, about the level of funding provided by government agencies and any performance measures in the contracts.
This is Katie Jo. Just for Seattle, the amount of funding for the 5 organizations or community partnerships under our Business Outreach and Education Fund is $3.2 million for 2-year contracts with the partners, and $1.4 million for the Business Outreach and Education Fund, and for the Community Outreach and Education Fund, it's over $3.2 million. Spread among 7 organizations and community partnerships, which actually equals like 18 organizations. But
we in Massachusetts do not, at least the Attorney General's office, don't provide funding for community engagement or outreach. But I mean, in connection with our collaboration with community partners on the clinic and other things, we can provide support for their funding applications, but we don't actually provide funding.
Great, thanks, Kate and Katie Jo. I'm going to turn it over to Jen now to close us out.
Yeah, so thanks to everyone for being with us today, and special thanks to Kate, Pablo, Katie Jo, and Liz for their time and efforts in preparing for today's presentations and for being so willing to share their experiences with all of us. Please keep an eye on your email, as we'll be sending out information about upcoming webinars soon. And in the meantime, we wanted to let you know of another resource Classman CWO has created for enforcement agencies, advocates, and community partners called the Labor Standards Enforcement Toolbox, which is a series of short papers covering various enforcement topics. So right now we have papers on intake and triage, investigations, collections, and strategic enforcement. And we'll be posting additional papers soon on other topics, including retaliation, settlement, and co-enforcement. You can find the Labor Standards Enforcement Toolbox series on both CWO and CLAF's websites. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.